Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our latest instalment of Straight Talking webinar series. My name is Alan Rogers, and I'm one of the business development managers here at STL. The purpose of this webinar series is to essentially help viewers navigate through and emerge through the ongoing pandemic and beyond, using insights, experiences from both ourselves and, of course, our customers and other local companies. Today, we're lucky enough to be joined by Rob Williams, who is the Business Systems and Operations Manager at Connection Support Oxford. Connection Support provide a breadth of specialist support services to a range of people facing complex life challenges. They provide flexible, tailored support and advice to families and a range of adults, both young and old, across Oxfordshire, Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes. The support covers housing, homelessness, isolation, money management, mental health, substance abuse, among many other things. Connection Oxford have been a customer now for a very long time, taking a range of services, including telephony, data connectivity and mobile. And obviously, we're really pleased to have Rob here with us today. Before we introduce Rob a little further and gain some valuable insights into life at Connection Support over the past 12 months, I'd like to hand over to my colleague Tim Hardy, who's going to give us a little bit more detail around STL, who we are and what we do.
Thanks, Alan. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. As Alan says, I'm Tim Hardy, and I've had the pleasure of working for STL for 8 years now in what's been a journey with an ever-changing landscape, because as we all know, technology is constantly changing and evolving. As a Whitney-based company, hopefully many of you know of STL and what we do, but for those that aren't fully aware of us, I'll just give you a brief overview. So STL are an IT and communications specialist that have been providing next generation services to businesses for over 22 years. We help businesses stay better connected to their customers and enable the people within a business to communicate and collaborate more effectively. So how do we do that? Firstly, we understand the complex challenges a business might face when considering how they might want to communicate with their customers and staff. And then we consider each case individually to help every customer maximize their efficiency, productivity, management and costs. Secondly, we understand that technology is always changing. So we ensure that we have the right skills, that we work with market leading partners, and most importantly, we always put the customer first. There are 3 key areas to what we do. So STL Communicate, we provide flexible, dynamic, fixed and mobile voice solutions, which include phone systems, both on-premise and more commonly hosted in the cloud. Lines and calls, which historically would be more traditional services such as analog and ISDN, but predominantly now, of course, we're talking about VoIP. And lastly, we provide mobile phone tariffs that offer greater scalability and flexibility than the networks can offer directly. The second area is STL Connect. This allows your business to connect securely and reliably using fixed or mobile data connectivity with an always-on approach. We want to ensure that you can always reach the outside world and have access to your critical data 24/7, 365. This might be through resilient dedicated fibre, 4G, structured Wi-Fi, or broadband connections that are catered to the size and nature of your business. We also offer cloud and fixed solutions for storing, managing, accessing that critical data from wherever you might be, both securely and reliably. And the final area is STL Collab IT. So data has become the most valuable commodity in the world, and how you access it or stop the wrong people from accessing it is now more important than ever. With our IT services and support, we can ensure your communications are optimized, secure, compliant, and most of all, reliable. This might be through managed IT support, cybersecurity, data backup, or your disaster recovery plan. We also consider what tools you use to collaborate internally, for example, the emergence of platforms such as Teams or unified communications as a way to communicate. We have over 22 years of experience in the industry and have faced many challenges and hurdles, and none more so than the last 12 months. So on that note, I'll pass back to Alan to introduce our guest today.
Thanks, Tim. So as I mentioned earlier, we're joined by Rob from Connection Support. Rob, thanks for joining us today and giving up your time this morning.
No problem, no problem.
So before we delve into a bit of Q&A, would you mind just giving us I've given a bit of an overview around Connections, but just elaborate on anything that I may not have touched on in terms of what you do, but also more specifically your role and what you do within the organisation.
Yeah, so Connection Support, it had been obviously an eventful year, 2020, but throughout 2019, we'd already begun a process of reviewing our systems, and it's a strange one for Connection Support. It's an organisation primarily about people. All of our teams, all of our workforce, always office-based. All of the work we do is face-to-face. We have teams of people working out in communities, in supported accommodation. So kind of awkwardly, we'd already begun on a process of looking at our systems, how we could utilise some more modern technologies. Part of that was to do with compliance, but it was also just utilising all of the added, benefits that we could probably get from remote working and all these sorts of tools. Usually, it's not a very technical company, if that makes sense. We don't employ people for their technical skills. So our support services, our suppliers, our IT services, it's really key we get that great support. So as we moved into 2020, we begun naively on a huge series of upgrades where we were going to really change the core infrastructure of the organisation, but also really try and understand what each of the teams needed and try and tailor our solution for that. But then COVID came along, and we were just at the point of where we were about to implement weeks of on-site work and training, and we had to stop. So a challenging year, certainly for 2020. For us, the COVID situation meant a great expanse of work. We worked closely with local and central government, and a lot of our work increased as part of the response to COVID. We worked with street homeless, and there was a massive push to basically house any of the street homeless in our areas. And of course, we work a lot with isolation. And with the lockdown, that became a really prominent need, if you like, for local authorities who are our customers at the end of the day. So a challenging year, I must admit.
Yeah, we speak to, obviously we've got over 1,000 customers and we're speaking to as many of them as we can ultimately. And it seems to be sort of differing responses whenever you talk to customers. Some are, are sort of lucky or, feel lucky if they kind of had a flat year compared to maybe the year before. Others are, ultimately down on maybe where they were before in terms of sort of, revenues and output. But others have kind of like thrived in this time. But even those that have thrived have obviously had their challenges. What would you say that the biggest challenges have been for you on the whole in the past 12 months?
Mainly was the loss of the offices. So right at the start of the COVID crisis, like many organisations, we closed the doors to our offices. And the initial response was to stop everything. The world had to stop whilst we took stock of what was happening. But we were then sort of left in the position of a real need to still develop, to still be able to expand and to support the services, but yet at a time when the old-fashioned way of engineers on site and lots of collaborative work together with our suppliers and with our teams that we're supporting was just impossible. So the worst thing was the loss of offices. Like I said, we're kind of like a people organization. A lot happens over a cup of tea in the office, and that went. And we were just at the point we had no, we didn't really have a big suite of tools to support remote working. And that's where companies like yourself really, came to the forefront of us being able to then proceed with it. And we went from that initial thought of stop everything, the world has to stop, to no, actually, we need to go twice as fast, but in a new way. And that was the challenge, how you could implement across a wide, very spread out workforce who generally need a lot of support to work through the changes to the systems. We had to do it at arm's length. Almost impossible challenge in one respect. But again, I'm just so pleased that we were able to turn it to a positive, and it forced a lot of change. It had to be done from a technical perspective. It felt messy at times, but I think, it just proved really the sort of value of investment in that technology, that we were able, all of our services, they continued to work throughout the whole crisis. Not a single person furloughed, not a single client lost support. And it's been a real learning experience of how our staff have been able to cope in that situation and still provide a really, really good service. We were blown away by our clients, people with a lot of challenges who usually you'd have to handhold and kind of guide through that process of how they're going to, make some really positive outcomes for themselves. And by and large, everyone coped really well. But it just really proved how technology was a key part to connection support, whereas before I don't think it was hidden really how much it was needed.
Absolutely, and that's common, especially in sort of larger organisations where that detail can just get lost. I mean, that kind of leads into the next question, really. I mean, what were the sort of major changes to how you worked, to maybe how you work now, and then I guess beyond that, how do you see you continuing to work when we eventually get back to, I guess, what people are calling the new normal? So you sort of a 3-stage thing, really. How have you moved on from where you were, where are you now, and where do you see yourself in 6, 8, 10, 12 months time?
I mean, for me, a real dramatic change was the move away from needing bricks and mortar. So every time we looked at a new service, it was almost the default response of, so we need to find an office. And we need to fill the office full of desks and desktop PCs. And that was almost a given. That investment was needed. You needed somewhere for the team to work. That was the biggest change. Working with yourselves, we went from the most basic for just a call conferencing system, just to enable teams to speak. Obviously, every team meeting was cancelled on the day we locked down. And then to moving into the more advanced stuff. So obviously, utilising Teams, and the strain that put on our systems, that was the hardest bit, where all of a sudden the way we managed our data, what we did with the traffic over our networks, and where people access the systems from dramatically changed. There was a slight bit of working from home before, and obviously that's been the norm ever since. Moving forward, it's about, we want to build on those successes. It's like I said, we were blown away by the way we were able to still work through those challenges, proving that investment and proving how those tools could be used in a not very technical user base, really limited. And our resources internally, at the start of January 2020, we had one person effectively who was able to provide those services. So whilst we tried to drive and increase that resource internally, we weren't able to do that without our suppliers really, and sort of able to offer the technical guidance. We're not a technical company.
Amazing.
That's the biggest challenge, but it's now the understanding of, you don't need bricks and mortar effectively to be able to work in an area. It's more about the people being in the right place more than infrastructure, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And you mentioned sort of technology and the advancement of it. I think we've seen that just in the industry. I think there's talk of kind of the adoption of new technologies being sort of expedited by kind of 3 years in the space of 6 to 12 months, and I think that can only be a good thing. I mean, do you see yourself kind of reverting back to any old ways of working, or do you very much see it as kind of, I think you've already touched on it, you kind of just kick on from here really and build on change as opposed to sort of reverting back?
Exactly. It's more, I think over the next few months, our plan is to take stock of what's worked and what hasn't. There is still a real, massive benefit in having people together, having spaces to work collaboratively. But it's more now looking at how we can use our office space more effectively. So whereas before you may have a large room with basically a number of desks and people sat there working away, it's now seeing, well, how can we get the best use of those offices? And like I said, technology has now become part of what connection support do. For most of the end users, that they don't see it like that. They're just carrying on doing the job they do, supporting their clients. But it's and it's like you said, it forced about 3 years of work into about 6 months. We had a roadmap, we had plans, and like I say, all on site. Everything was about engineers and people on site supporting our staff, where we just were really blown away that we were able to push that through in a few months.
Absolutely, yeah, and I've obviously worked closely with you on certain elements, and it's interesting to see how you have evolved in this time. I mean, obviously mobile is something that you've used and continue to use quite heavily. I mean, what other technologies would you kind of like to see or continue to kind of roll out to get connection support where you want them from a technical perspective? I mean, using Teams already you mentioned, but other than that, is there anything else you sort of see being pertinent to you?
I think it's initially, with most of the tools we put in, we kind of went for the bare bones basics. So we needed Teams to enable meetings to happen on a basic level, video conferencing. But now we're in that position of where you think we know Teams does more. We, in the past year, haven't had time to explore much of that. And we're now at that stage when we can say, well, what other tools have we got within Office 365 and Teams and the change in infrastructure? Like I say, we're not pinned down to a few large offices. We can now look at, we work across a very wide area, both in rural areas, in urban, we have supported accommodation. We have some people working in the middle of night, out in the middle of nowhere. So that has now become, it's almost a moot point really where they work. From my perspective, I know I can support them. I know I can provide the access to the systems and the information they need. It's, like I said, really building on the successes. There's still a degree of, like I said, you need face-to-face. We certainly all miss having team meetings. We miss that time in the office. But it's now looking at, well, how can we build and let technology empower that sort of thing? So offices will look different in the future. We don't know how. We're still working that out, but it feels we have a suite of tools that we can use. So for all our services, they vary so much. We know we can probably find something that fits each service, instead of previously we had a kind of one size fits all. Absolutely,
and technologies that you ultimately were possibly not using even sort of pre-pandemic to their fullest, but now looking at new technologies and actually optimizing how you use them. I know one specific one was starting to try and roll out cloud telephony as a sort of fixed telephone system solution, as opposed to kind of an on-site system. And I think that for me was one of the most positive kind of moves I saw you make in that time. And it's great to see that technology finally kind of hitting home, really. I mean,
and that's the bit on that point as well. With the cloud, we previously, obviously, in every office we had the more old-fashioned phone system. So to man and to staff those systems was a burden. And we had no understanding of the number and the volume of our calls and the nature of those calls. Having that cloud telephony really enabled us to move forward. Now we don't, it's like I say, there's now more of a question of, do you even need an office? There's some areas where it won't be the more traditional office, but we now have the information to understand. We know what calls we're getting, where we're getting them, the flow, the peak demand. That's made a dramatic effect, across the business. In the first few weeks, the phones weren't answered, and that was just unbearable. It was literally people having to walk in and pick up voicemails. So, to be able to make those changes so quickly in the height of the lockdown was just, really dramatic. The phones ring, they get answered. We never knew how many calls we had. We receive a lot more than we thought. Yeah. And it's been really, really powerful to show the rest of the organization, look at what we're dealing with here. That's, for us, I don't think it was really understood before. That is a frontline service, answering the phones. It was almost seen as like an administrative task that happens in the background. It is now recognised. It's a frontline service. We have clients, professionals, commissioners, all coming through that. Really, and again, I think it just proved the value of the investment.
Yeah, and also who you work with ultimately, who you're providing support to. I think those things are super critical. They're absolutely paramount to what you do. Being able to be contacted and being able to make contact and ultimately giving support to the people that need it so much. And it's great work that you do. I mean, in closing, any other sort of considerations for your for the next year? I mean, what are your sort of key considerations for the next 12 months really as an organization and obviously for you in particular?
I mean, I think the main bit is to be able to plan. So like all organizations at the start of lockdown, you kind of expected it would last a few months, and you would just get through. That's where I found you guys so responsive. We'd plan a month's work and then realize the lockdown would be continuing and you'd have to reassess what your plans were, sometimes at massively short notice. And it's now we just want to get more into, to be able to take stock and really get the kind of fine detail from these systems. So what's the next step we can do with all our incoming calls? How, what's the sort of next stage, if you like? So, like I said, it's going more from a reactive response. We need to somehow keep going to, like I previously said, to build on the successes and move on from there, hopefully.
Absolutely. No, brilliant. Thanks for that, Rob. Really appreciate your insight. And that was a really good view into kind of, the past 12 months at Connection Support and how you've managed to kind of adapt and overcome challenges. I mean, all in all, it sounds really positive, which is quite refreshing, I think, at this point in time. And hopefully it was useful for everybody watching and anybody that sort of watches this, going forward, and it might just give them some thoughts and ideas into their own organizations. I'm going to pass back to Tim now just to sort of go, recap on those key points really, and look at how we sort of consider, moving forwards in this challenging time.
Yeah, thanks, Alan, and thanks, Rob, for giving us some insight into your recent challenges and how you've managed to overcome those. A common theme seems to be emerging when we speak to a lot of our customers, in that the past 12 months have really been a big learning curve, and there's been lots of trial and error. But it's safe to say that business probably won't return to exactly how it was pre-2020. So just to close, I'll give you a recap of some key points and reflect on how technology could impact the working world in 2021 and beyond. So firstly, the use of technology and adoption of next generation services has been accelerated. Many legacy forms of technology that were held on to with the excuse of not having to fix something that isn't broken are quickly being replaced with current, more secure, more flexible and feature-rich options. Secondly, mobile technology is more relevant than ever. So whether this is an app on a personal phone, a company phone, or both, mobility and flexibility are key. And with new ways to track usage, secure and protect these devices and monitor or manage SIMs and hardware, the employer doesn't have to worry about visibility or security any longer. And we appreciate lots of businesses are still in cost management mode, and of course, pricing is still a key factor. However, the misconception that new technologies are expensive and cost prohibitive is shifting. Often there are ways to future-proof your communications without necessarily having to budget for a significant capital expenditure. We touched on this previously, but data is the most valuable commodity in the world. With a greater online presence comes more data and more information, but people might have to access it in many different locations, using different devices and at varying times of the day. And therefore, how you store it, allow access to it, monitor it, and keep it secure has never been more important. Another recurring theme is the need to keep moving forward. Tech companies will keep innovating, and it's down to the likes of STL to help you understand and assess how such innovations can help your businesses. It's not a time to stand still, and being ready for the next set of challenges is more important now than ever. So hopefully you found this session useful, and if you think there are any ways that STL can help your business, we'd love to hear from you. Thanks for joining, and have a great day.
Thanks again for your time, Rob.
No problem. No problem at all.
Yeah, that was really, really useful.